Big Camp. We are here to learn a little bit more about health this morning. And our presenter is Associate Professor Dr. Ross Grant, I should say. I've put all the letters in front of your name there. But before we do, let me just read to you a passage from the Bible. This is taken from Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, and you'll be familiar with it, I'm sure. It says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loves me and gave himself for me." Amen. My name is Erin Keegan. If we haven't met already, I'm the new health director for North New South Wales. And up the back of this tent, you'll notice there's a couple of resources. For those of you who have not yet received our health calendar, please take one. And on the corner of this calendar is a QR code where you can sign up to receive our monthly newsletters that come out and learn what's happening about health across the conference, some online, some face-to-face. And this is what it looks like on the chairs just up the back. There's also a copy of A Taste of Food as Medicine up there, which is a giveaway for you to take home as well today. But without further ado, let me introduce you to Ross Grant. Ross is a clinical biochemist and associate professor in the Centre for Lifestyle Medicine at Avondale University. Ross spent over 20 years as a research and teaching academic in the medical schools of both the University of New South Wales and University of Sydney, before recently joining the faculty at Avondale University. Ross has published over 70 scientific journal articles, and has editorial responsibilities for key medical journals in the field, including the journal Antioxidants. Ross's passion is to understand at the molecular level how lifestyle interacts with an individual's biochemistry, driving it toward either health or disease. Thank you, Ross.
Well, thank you, Erin, and good morning, everybody. It is a privilege, actually, to be asked to do something like this. And except for students who have to be there, otherwise they'll fail their exams, you actually came voluntarily, which I'm incredibly surprised at. Not really. And it is because you're all interested in health. And by God's grace, we'll be able to give you something which will not only just, hopefully, not just inform you as to what to do, but hopefully give you an underpinning of information and an understanding so that you can take that information away and apply it in your own life, because everybody's going to be different. Now, I have to apologize, and I know that that's something that you never do when you're from the front, but we have two challenges. One is the fact that my animations won't be coming up on the screen, so everything will come up all at once. And the reason why I use animations is I find them very important, because otherwise you're reading past what I'm already talking about. And some of those slides will be quite dense. However, if they'd come up one at a time, you would have felt very comfortable as I introduce you through to each concept. Now you're just going to see pretty much a whole lot of stuff. And that wouldn't have been okay, except that, that's if I could have pointed to this complex screen where you would follow and I would follow from there. Unfortunately, with new technology, we can't point to a screen like that anymore. So I'm going to have to orient you as best I can when we get to that. But look, don't worry. As far as the information is concerned, it's not there for you to take away. There's no exams. And hopefully we'll get an opportunity at the end for you to ask questions if you still have some. But it's an important question, isn't it? The current health crisis. Why are more Australians dying than ever before? And can lifestyle medicine help? This did work earlier. Okay, so just as a quick run through for the week, so we'll talk about today's topic, obviously, the health crisis. Tomorrow we want to talk about particularly the paleo, Mediterranean, vegan. The idea is not so much to go through those individually, though I will for the paleo particularly to begin with, but to really understand some of the principles of why food of different types is going to be healthy for you. And I am going to walk you through some of the ways in which the body actually uses food, whether it's fats, sugars, or proteins in particular. Because if you understand that, then you're going to make sense as to why certain things work, certain things don't, and whether certain things that might work in one way, such as losing weight, might still be working against you in terms of your health. Does that make sense? So we're going to do that tomorrow. Wednesday, physical activity. Well, that's an important one, and it's a perennial. We know physical activity is important, but how much is important? And why exactly is it important? How much do you really need to do? Then Thursday, sleep. I mean, it doesn't matter where you look. I mean, essentially we have pretty much a sleep crisis. I'll talk about that and particularly how much you need, why you need it, what the body's doing when it is sleeping, and hopefully how you can improve it. And then Friday, stress and anxiety. I mean, there was a little bit mentioned, I think, last night in last night's presentation with Ty Gibson. But stress and anxiety are an absolute epidemic. And it is something that we do need to look at. And I hope to give you, now I'll give it to you from a neuroscientist point of view, rather than a psychologist point of view, but I actually did run it by a psychologist to make sure that I was getting it right. And hopefully give you some tips as to essentially what it is, and particularly within a Christian context, how we can overcome the idea of, well, some of the things that are causing us stress and anxiety. So, now this is back from a year ago, but it's essentially, it's a good title. Healthcare crisis costing Australians their lives. Wait times for ambulances, they've been longer than, and depending on the state, but they can be certainly even up to over an hour, 45 minutes or so. 67% increase in patients leaving the accident and emergency without being treated. In fact, I was in an A&E not so long ago. I actually had what was called an inflamed chalazion, and I couldn't get in to see a GP. And I did a telehealth one, but that was not a great experience. So I decided I would try and get somebody there so that they could actually see it. And waited 6 hours. But while I was there, a couple of people just left. A middle-aged guy who I suspect he came in with chest pain. Well, he left in the end going, well, this is just taking me too long. And I figured, well, hopefully you're okay. He left, and another young guy who had clearly broken his hand decided that he'd waited long enough as well and left. Now, probably nothing they would have done to his hand anyway, but hospital wait times, incredibly long. Hospital bed shortages, even if you have been seen, there may not be a bed waiting for you. GP and specialist shortages, extremely hard to get into a GP, particularly in some of the country areas, as we know. Nursing and allied health staff shortages. And we know that it's even hard to recruit people into some of these professions. Whether or not it's getting them into nursing, whether or not it's getting them into being an AMBO, whether or not it's getting them into being a physio. A lot of people have left the industry, and not many of them, and it's harder and harder to replace them. And maybe that's exacerbated by something else. Now, some of you may have seen this before, and I wish I could point to it. Have a look at the orange one on the top. So the orange one on the top is 2022. This is what we call all-cause mortality. So if you have a look at that broad blue line in the middle, that's just the average, if you like, of over a number of years, just how many people die per year. You can see that the yellow line above, that's 2022. Significantly above, that was accounting for around about 16,000 additional deaths following at the end of 2021. And then we were seeing a similar trend, that's the blue line at the top. We were seeing a similar trend in 2023 until we got to about week 33, so last quarter of the year, if you like. And there was a change, actually, and the reason for that was the Australian Bureau of Statistics decided to change their baseline. So it's interesting, and I have it here. So the baseline normally was 2015 to 2019 because that was a baseline number of years before we actually ended up with COVID, etc. But late in 2023, they decided to change that so that we include 2017 to 2019 and 2021. And in fact, remove 2020 because that was a particularly low year, and so they wanted to make sure that the baseline was a little bit higher. So the point is, though, that we do have a significant increase in the number of deaths. In fact, there is a Senate inquiry which has been approved just recently to investigate that fact. Why is it that Australians, and not just Australians, but in fact it has moved, it's something that we've actually observed around the world quite significantly, whether it's US, Israel, France, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands. with no great statistics. Now, there's a lot more stats and a lot more I could talk about if this were a topic where I was specifically delving into that. I'm not. But it's just pointing out that no other time in history have we probably had the level of health crisis, well, I should say modern history, that we have at the moment. And this is, again, the Australian Bureau of Statistics putting some numbers around what were the conditions that were actually causing us. So we've got a significant increase in cancer, dementia, ischemic heart disease, other cardiac conditions such as myocarditis, pericarditis, cerebrovascular disease or stroke, and things like diabetes. Interestingly, all of the people are dying, while the people are dying at an accelerated rate, the underlying health issues, the major risk factors for death from all causes, these are all linked to lifestyle. Is that true? Diabetes, heart disease, different types of cancers, all of them are actually linked to lifestyle. Now, there seems to be an acceleration of lifestyle-linked disease, or at least people who are dying from them, but they are actually lifestyle-linked. So can lifestyle medicine, or as I like to say, lifestyle modification, work? What I'm going to try and show you today is absolutely it can. And one of the things I'd like to take you, if you can take away from here, just the fact that the choices that you make, the consequences are not arbitrary. Does that make sense? You make certain choices, particularly based on your lifestyle, and those choices have a consequence. You can't escape those, no matter how much you want to ignore them. And I know that it's popular to everybody have their own reality. But let me just point out, you can't make a choice about the consequences you end up with. You make certain choices, there will be certain consequences. All right. So just pointing out, this is 2021, but essentially Australia, what are we dying of mostly? You can see that for males, heart disease is number one. For females, it's actually dementias. We are the only country in the world that I know that that's the case. And in fact, for males and females, if you put them together, we're number two. And again, for the rest of the world, dementias come in at around about number 5 or 6. So for some reason, Australians seem to be developing a dementia at a much greater rate than other countries. Now, we do have a longer lifespan by a couple of years from some of the highest ones, but that probably isn't the best explanation for it, and certainly not the only one. But heart disease, dementia, again, stroke or cerebrovascular disease, lung cancer, and then chronic obstructive pulmonary disease of different types. Same sort of thing around the world, although, as I mentioned, those are shifted up and down a little bit. But we can see that 80% of the top 10 deaths are actually lifestyle-linked diseases. So if you've got a lifestyle-linked disease, what do you think the best approach to doing something to prevent that disease or prevent from dying from that disease? Do something about lifestyle, that would be the approach. Whereas, in effect, what we try and do is medicate it. Now, what I've been teaching for the last 20 years has actually been pharmacology, surprisingly enough. So teaching about drugs. Now, I particularly teach in two areas. One is what we call neuropharmacology. That's easy because none of the drugs work. And although I do have to explain why they don't work, particularly for the neurodegeneratives. And then number two, a thing called pharmacokinetics, which is actually the mathematical modeling of how drugs move in the body and ultimately how you can adjust dosages if you need to. Not a favourite topic for students, but what I used to try and do is at least make it interesting for them. It was my challenge to make, if you like, one of their worst subjects, one of their favourites. Happened occasionally. Lifestyle medicine, a brief review, 2018 this one. By ignoring the root causes of disease and neglecting to prioritise lifestyle measures for prevention, the medical community is placing people at harm. It's very true. Advanced nations influenced by Western diet are in the midst of a health crisis, resulting largely from poor lifestyle choices. Now, we can see that there may be other things playing into it, but whatever is playing into it is still playing into increasing or accelerating your lifestyle-linked disease. Make sense? Most of these chronic conditions are preventable and are the result of an unhealthy lifestyle. More than 80% of chronic conditions could be avoided through the adoption of healthy lifestyle recommendations. Now, we'll get to what a healthy lifestyle is a little bit later on. But I can tell you for certain, and we've had a number of cases come through the years, and most people will tell you that they have a good diet and that they exercise on a regular basis and generally get good sleep, though some of them will admit that they don't. When you do assess them, so far I haven't yet met one where the criterion were consistently done well. And that includes myself. But, okay, how does lifestyle link to disease? Now, again, love to have been able to point to some of this sort of thing. But number one cause of death, at least for men, and if we put men and women together, it's still just number one. Number two is cardiac, or at least the dementias. But if you have a look on the left-hand side, am I in people's way here a little bit? If you have a look on the left-hand side, we start off with the arteries, and if you have a look, the arteries are actually made up of 3 layers. There's what's called the intima, media, and adventitia. And it's really the damage of that inside layer. They're called epithelial cells. You don't have to worry about the name, but it's actually the inside layer of cells. If you damage those, you're going to affect things like blood pressure, and you'll develop what's called that fatty streak. And if you come down the fatty streak, that's the first thing, then you end up developing that sort of little bit of necrotic tissue. You end up with a whole lot of oxidation and that sort of thing happening. Now, they've put here in this one calcification, but actually calcification and the soft plaque, the one that tends to build up in the artery, are actually 2 different things, but they can co-locate, they don't have to. A calcification will actually cause you to have a rigid artery. The soft plaque is the one that tends to disrupt. Your weight in avocados. They're very calorie dense, but the point is that it was the simple sugars, the simple fats, and particularly the saturated fats that do it. Diabetes will do it. Diabetes does it, and I want to mention diabetes a little bit later on, but the big problem with diabetes is that your blood sugar goes up. What's the problem with blood sugar going up? It's just glucose. Because glucose sticks to stuff. It sticks to lots of stuff, and it sticks to stuff in your body, And it sticks to the proteins that are supposed to be doing other things. And that's what's causing a lot of the damage. Chronic stress will do it. Now, this is particularly a problem for somebody like me, who's a type A introverted personality. And, I tend to get stressed over a lot of things, although I don't even know that I'm stressed, and live basically that way. And I end up, yes, I can do a lot of damage to myself. Chronic infection, problems with bad teeth, if you've got bad teeth. Other infections that are coming from different areas, respiratory infections, even bladder infections, and any other circulating irritant. That can even come from things that you might be eating from your food. It can be pesticides, and there's some very good links actually from relatively recent research that talks about pesticides, and it's linked through to things like Parkinson's disease. All right, I'm going to take you through very quickly. So, is there a lifestyle link with heart disease? Fairly comfortable? There's a lifestyle link with heart disease, absolutely. What about cancers? Is there a lifestyle link with cancers? Let me demystify a cancer for you very quickly. This slide will do it. There's a normal cell at the top. That cell gets irritated. Now, the main thing is if it gets irritated, damage to, anyway, don't worry about the negative cell cycle regulator, but anyway, it gets irritated. And certain things will irritate. I'm going to show you a little bit in a minute. It then develops what we call a pre-neoplastic tissue. This is tissue which is not yet cancerous, but it's growing in ways that it probably shouldn't be growing. And most of that has come because it's actually damaged the DNA. You all know the DNA sits in the middle, right? And it's actually regulating whether or not that cell should be doing what it's doing. Now, when you damage that, and you keep damaging it, and you damage it in ways that the cell no longer recognizes itself. Let me just tell you what happens. So, skin cancer. We're the skin cancer capital of the world, right? And that's because we love going out into the sun, and yet most of us are fair-skinned. So we go out into the sun damages our skin. What happens if we damage? The first thing that happens, we go red, right? And then if we've damaged it too much, what happens? Do we peel? Yeah, and some of us blister, which is even the worst bit. So we peel. Now what's happened? Those cells that are actually sitting on the outside of the skin, they've recognized that they've been damaged. The first thing the cell wants to do is repair it. So it tries to repair it. If it can't repair it, then it starts switching itself onto a number of different pathways, one of which is, if it can't repair, it kills itself, what we call apoptosis or cell suicide. So it'll actually kill itself. And when it can't kill itself on its own, it will actually get the immune system to come in and destroy it. However, in order for the immune system to recognize it, it needs to flick out what's called little death receptors so that the immune system can recognize it. If you've damaged a cell in ways that it no longer recognizes that it can't repair itself, it no longer recognizes, or you may have damaged those very areas that it would normally kill itself, the pathways that it would kill itself, and you've also damaged the part of the cell which could flick out a death receptor and say to the immune system, come and get me, I'm damaged. If you've damaged all of those, and the only thing that's left to do is I remember how to divide, that's all it does. That's a cancer cell. Does that make sense? So it's a little deaf, dumb and blind cell. I've had this discussion with many people even around the world, just pointing out this is not an evolutionary takeover. It's a little deaf, dumb and blind cell. And if you recognize that, I think the way we treat it is going to be a lot more intelligent. So we've ended up with a cancer because we haven't been able to, not only have we not been able to repair it, but the immune system now can't recognize it or recognize it efficiently. We're producing cancer cells every day. And generally, the immune system recognizes them very effectively. Now, we don't have time to go through to the complex mechanism that the immune system uses. But it's doing it all of the time. If you have an effective and active immune system, you can be very effective in being able to clear these and never need to get it. Now, we've done our best to have a little bit of animation here, but normal cell, DNA damage, tumor initiation, advanced cancer. You get that now, right? Let's have a look. All of the things that cause DNA damage. We talked about ionizing radiation, ultraviolet light, gamma rays. What about hormone disruptors, things like BPA, dioxins that you can get through from the food supply. Then you've also got the immune system which comes in here. So if you've got a chronically active immune system, that will also damage things. If you're chronically stressed, and notice just come down to the left-hand side here, increased HPA axis, that's the psychosocial stress. That's putting the body under considerable stress where metabolically it's having to be very, very active. And when the body is metabolically active, it produces lots of free radicals. That's going to create lots and lots of oxidative damage to lots and lots of tissue. So, makes sense. If you don't get enough sleep, the body can't repair a lot of the damage that's being caused. Cigarette smoke, alcohol. Do you all know how much alcohol the Cancer Council of New South Wales suggests is acceptable in order for you not to be at increased risk of cancer? Yeah, it's absolutely zero. And it makes perfect sense. Absolute zero. And we've actually shown, even in the central nervous system, that you can see, even with one alcoholic drink a day, and we took the CSF from people who had gone to surgery for different reasons, we asked them whether it was okay. Little bits of their cerebrospinal fluid and asked them how much alcohol they had in a day. And we could tell even one alcoholic drink a day was enough to see an increase in inflammatory activity within the central nervous system, within the brain. It doesn't take much. And then, of course, increased saturated fats and microbial infections. All of those make a contribution to potentially DNA damage of different tissue. Now, fortunately, we have antioxidants. Now, I don't have time to go into the detail here, but oxidative stress just is molecules that have an unpaired electron, and they just want to get an electron from something. In the case of an antioxidant, it's something that actually can donate an electron. And that's what these antioxidants do. You've all heard of things like, who's heard of glutathione? Glutathione? Yeah, it's the body's main antioxidant, actually. And that's that GPX is glutathione peroxidase, one of the enzymes there. But there's a whole bunch of others: vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin D even to some extent, carotenoids certainly, and then this whole group of polyphenols and other phytonutrients that come through from there. Notice that the place that they come from, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about exercise, notice that exercise and physical activity increase your antioxidant enzymes. They're very effective for doing it. And it's one of the reasons why there's a link to sedentary lifestyle and ultimately a lot of these other diseases. And then nutrition, whole food, plant-based, that's where they're coming from. If you're taking nutrition into the body, and we can talk more about this tomorrow, but if nutrition, the food that you're getting is purely just to satisfy hunger, fat and sugar will satisfy hunger. In fact, fat and protein do it better even than fat and sugar. Sugar just gives you more of a high. But fat, sugar and protein, yep, you can actually satisfy your hunger with that. But fairly quickly, the body is not going to get the nutrients it needs, and so you will end up with a whole significant range of other diseases as a result of that type of diet. But these are antioxidants that can help to prevent the cause of cancer. Now, on top of that, the body has this fantastic way of being able to repair itself. And there's multiple different ways of doing it. But notice that if you, and I'll go the left-hand side first, decreased sleep decreases the body's ability to clear away some of that rubbish. Any genetic mutation, so you've heard of the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene? So this is the genes for breast cancer. So your susceptibility to breast cancer, if you have a BRCA1, BRCA2, some mutations associated with that, also increases risk of cancer for the gut. All that gene does is produce a protein which is associated or linked to repairing the DNA. And it just means that people who have that mutation in the BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene, the classic breast cancer risk genes, they don't repair their DNA as quickly. Now, Angelina Jolie, you'll remember from some years ago, decided to have a double mastectomy because she had a family history, because she had mutations within those genes. Now, theoretically, she didn't need to do that. In fact, all she needed to do was actually make sure that she was increasing and improving her capacity to be able to repair the DNA by staying on a lifestyle habits which were going to maintain that increased immune function. And then on the other side, nutrition deficiencies, B6, B12, B9 and B3. And then viral infection also can decrease your ability for base excision repair. So the last one that I'll mention, normal cell through to advanced cancer, top right-hand side, that's the immune surveillance. Now, I just wanted to mention natural killer cells. So natural killer cells is your absolute final defense. Before that, you've actually got cells that, as I mentioned, they can only recognize if the cell can throw out the death receptor. And that's things like CD8 positive cells, that type of thing. Now, we do still have one level of defense after that, and that's the natural killer cells. Now, we're one of the few labs in the country that have been measuring natural killer cells and doing some work with that over the last couple of years. But the interesting thing is that natural killer cell function, and they use this absolute brilliance in the way this is set up. They do what's called pattern recognition and various things so that it can still tell what's you and what's not. But you can actually hurt your natural killer cells and you can reduce their capacity to function. And part of that is, again, linked to lifestyle. So again, stress will significantly reduce it. You will also reduce it if you have low levels of omega-3. Now, there hasn't been enough work. In fact, part of the study that we're having to give up and, in fact, give back about $80,000 in another couple of weeks is because we can't transfer that study from where we are at the moment through to Avondale, which is a real shame. We would love to have been able to do it, but because we wanted to look more at the lifestyle elements that are associated with that and its risk for circulating cancers, which we were looking for. But we're letting that go. But in any case, natural killer cell function, extremely important. And there are unfortunately some treatments that have been provided in recent years that have also reduced natural killer cell function. And we're just hoping that over time, cancer, is it recognized? Is there a link between cancer and lifestyle? Yep. You understand the fairly basics of how you develop a cancer. You can then be intelligent about what you can do. Doesn't matter whether it's bowel cancer, whether it's, lung cancer, etc. All right, what about diabetes? So diabetes extremely prevalent, and I recognize that there will be many people here who have been touched by diabetes. But notice that diabetes is too much sugar, really, for you. Now, different people can handle different things. As we get older, we need less. What are you taking the carbohydrate in for in the first place? What's the whole point? Yeah, you're generating energy. I only wish we could throw up a pathway now and show you where you get that energy from. But the body's very good, and it actually, we'll talk about it more tomorrow, actually. But the body loves carbohydrate. Now, we don't want simple carbohydrate because the body wants to ease it in. But we certainly have an environment which allows us to have lots of simple carbohydrate. But once the body has enough, and the body sort of, in comes the carbohydrate, cuts it up, glucose out of it mostly, liver starts to go, well, blood sugar's going up, sends a signal to the pancreas. The pancreas produces what? Insulin. Insulin then comes along, and particularly for things like the muscles and the fats, etc. It will then signal for a molecule to be translocated, what we call a transporter, a GLUT4, and it will go to the membrane and then allows glucose to go into the cell. When it's got enough glucose in the cell, what does the GLUT4 do? It closes off and go, no, we don't want any more sugar. Now, you don't want to put more sugar into a system than it needs, right? Because we know glucose can be damaging, correct? So once you've got enough sugar in the body starts going, well, I don't want any more. And so you start to develop what's called insulin resistance. Why is the body resistant to insulin? Because insulin's trying to get more glucose into the cell, and the cell's going, no, I don't want it. But the liver's going, well, my blood sugar's still going up, I've got to get rid of it. So it produces more insulin, forces more insulin into the body. More glucose into the cell. The cell now has got lots of glucose. What did we say about glucose, high levels of glucose? It does a reaction, what we call advanced glycation. And it actually will bind to something. There's a specific reaction called the Maillard reaction, which it will do. And it starts to do that to lots of things. Damages it inside the cell, damages it outside the cell. The body doesn't want it. So what would be the best thing to do when you start to develop insulin resistance? What's the thing to do at that point? Reduce the amount of sugar that you've got coming into the body. Does that make sense? Is that possible to do? It is possible to do, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to leave it there. So eventually the pancreas gets damaged. If that gets damaged, unfortunately now you're developing more of a type 2, and I've been talking about a type 1. So solutions, there's a couple of good solutions here, and just if I can just mention about some of the other things, you'll certainly damage, and this is some of the consequences. You will definitely, I remember we've done studies on groups of people over a number of years, and we had one gentleman who had a blood glucose coming in. He was not diagnosed as a diabetic. He had a blood glucose of 33. So what's a normal? Yeah, somehow less than 6 ideally if you're fasting, less than 7 if it's non-fasting. And he was at 33. I rang him, eventually got onto him. Oh, yes. Didn't do a thing about it. Now, the consequences of that, unfortunately, he's not going to escape them. He's going to damage his nervous tissue, so he'll damage the back of his eye, his macula, small blood vessels associated with a number of different organs, including the kidneys. He's going to run into problems with, certainly developing things like atherosclerosis. So which one will he die of first? It'll just depend as things go through. All right. So what are the solutions? Physical activity is one of the first things that you can do. Physical activity itself, even without insulin, actually increases GLUT4 because the body needs to use that energy, and it'll use the glucose that's floating around first. So after every meal, if you do have some issue with insulin sensitivity, after every meal, go for a nice walk. That's not a jog. It's not even a fast walk. It's a walk. Spend about half an hour. And that will be significantly good for your blood sugar levels. Eat less simple carbohydrates. I mean, that again is a straightforward given. Look, the great thing is being a scientist, I don't have to be sensitive to your needs because I'm not looking after you. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to say, if it's hurting you, I don't care. You shouldn't care whether or not you like it. Well, but I like the taste. Well, I get that. There's a lot of things I like to do too, which are not good for me. And it just depends what you want the consequences for. Does that make sense? So the consequences you will have to live with. And if you like the taste and decide, well, no, that's okay. I remember, now my wife was a wound care specialist nurse. And so she would be looking after a lot of people who had peripheral neuropathy and ending up with sores and that sort of stuff on their legs. And there was one particular gentleman who would come in with chronic ulcers that were not healing because of his peripheral neuropathy. He wasn't getting circulation down into his legs. He couldn't feel much, and because of his diabetes. But his wife would bring him in, while he was waiting, would bring him in donuts. Now, I don't know whether she just wanted to kill him quicker or whether it was truly misplaced love, but, it was certainly misplaced. Now, I want to throw this next one up for you. Drugs do not treat diabetes. Yeah? Drugs do not treat diabetes. There's basically two classes. So, well, there's multiple classes, but the sulfonylureas and anyway, the DPP-4s, even most of the others actually, except for one of them. So metformin, a lot of people go on. You know what metformin does? The place where you produce energy in the body is called the mitochondria. Most of you will have heard of that from high school. The mitochondria it goes through a whole series of pathways. The last one is what we call oxidative phosphorylation. It actually goes through what we call the respiratory chain. First part of that is what we call complex 1. Metformin is a complex 1 poison. It will actually poison that part of the mitochondrion so that you're pushing the precursors into the mitochondrion, but they're getting stuck at that point. And so what happens is that your body's not producing the ATP, that's the currency for energy that the body uses. It's not producing ATP, it's actually getting less of it because you've poisoned your body's ability to be able to do it. And so it's building up what they call AMP. And now AMP activates another enzyme called AMP kinase. Anyway, there's a whole lot of literature on this and I'm just like, what? You're going to use a mitochondrial poison and then tell me, as a lot of people and a lot of you know, that people will tell you that metformin is actually good for you. People are even taking it as a longevity pill because it activates what they call the AMP kinases. Now, there's a whole pathway down there where it's all associated with having positive things happening when you start to have low energy. Yes, AMP kinase is activated when you are actually starving and fasting, and there's real positive things in that, not when you're poisoning the mitochondrion. And the end result of all of that is ultimately just negative. So I'm not telling you not to go on it. If you're a diabetic and you're actually taking medication, definitely stay on that medication. You need to have that blood sugar down. But think seriously about whether or not you want to stay there and whether or not there's other options. Does that make sense? The other ones are basically just trying to increase either the insulin production itself or the sensitivity of the cell to insulin. Does that make sense? So again, pretty much every other drug class there is actually trying to force more glucose into the cell. And then there's only one other class which actually prevents glucose from being converted, or some of the more complex carbohydrates from being converted into glucose within the gut. And so it just means you've got more sugar in the gut and there's all sorts of bloating issues in the lower bowel as a result. Bottom line is, how can you solve it? Does lifestyle play a role? Are there choices that you could do? Yeah, okay. What about lifestyle choices, and can they impact things like viral infection and diseases? Did you know that we're actually having so 2022 was actually one of the highest early flu years, and this is higher than it. So we've actually gone, we've hit a record each year, and so the number of people actually getting early flu in early part of the season has actually dramatically increased. This is just so that you know that we are still, according to the stats, we're still in a COVID crisis. That's January 2024, just on the right-hand side there. But as long as the immune system is functioning normally, infections such as COVID go unnoticed. This was actually published fairly early in the COVID crisis. Plant-based diets, pescatarian diets, COVID-19 severity. Eating a whole food plant-based diet confers 70% reduction in risk of moderate to severe infection. Small steps, strong shield, directly measured, etc. Physical activity significantly reduces the risk of hospitalisation from COVID, and it can be anywhere around the 30 to 40%. The apparent protective effects of regular physical activity extended to those who had other chronic conditions. So it wasn't just those who were fit. You can have a chronic condition and still do exercise and still get the benefits. Does that make sense? So again, lifestyle plays a significant role. And other lifestyle factors and the immune system. Sleep improves the immune system. Nutritional physical activity certainly increases the immune system. Sunlight affects the immune system. There's lots of things linked through with vitamin D, but also the production of certain things, even serotonin in the skin, which can modulate different things. Psychological stress in the human immune system, no question about that. Stress does increase things like cortisol, which suppresses immune activity as well, and various other things. So, vegetarian-based dietary patterns and their relationship with inflammatory and immune markers. Study provides evidence that the vegetarian-based dietary patterns are associated with lower inflammatory markers, such as C-reactive protein, which many of us will have had done at some stage. Favourable inflammatory profiles for vegetarian-based populations, plausible that immune function may also be involved given the inherent link. Now, it's really interesting. We've looked at blood profiles of people over many years. And if you are somebody who is a vegan particularly, vegetarian secondarily, we always find that there is a lower white cell count, and often lower, particularly white cell, particularly in the neutrophil class. And for that, it just suggests that there is less need for the immune system to be having to target things that it's seeing less of it on a regular basis. So whole food, plant-based eating, in addition to other healthy lifestyle practices, seem to effectively improve our immune system. But this is a really good question. If we have such great hospitals, why do we need to tell people about preventive health or engage in it ourselves when we have the medical science to fix us up when we get damaged and sick just as good as new? We've got all this great medical, I myself have a patent for a triple therapy for treating neurodegenerative disease. I'm not a millionaire, I'm not a billionaire. We actually did sell that patent, not for that much money, but in any case. And it doesn't work. But I'm in really good company. In fact, there has literally been billions, particularly in the neurodegeneratives. There's literally been billions spent. And there hasn't been, well, there's a couple of new antibodies that the Americans have come on the market, but I won't get sidetracked onto that. But nothing really works. But anyway, medical science has gone a long way, hasn't it? And all of us have benefited from it. But let's just take our little scenario here. There we are, happy and healthy. As time goes on, we've just been stressed. It's much easier to stop off at Macca's on the way home. And eventually, and that's a little ant there by the toilet bowl, just because ants they find sugar. So anyway, that's what he's finding there. As a result, he's ended up with a heart attack. But fortunately, there was an ambulance that could take him to the hospital at that point, and so he ended up in surgery, which is great, and he's ended up as good as new. Are you as good as new? Thank God for the surgical skills that we have and for the medical science that we have. Am I right? I would say pretty much every one of us here have had some cause for being able to use the excellent medical sciences and hospitals that we've got. In fact, Australia is number 5 in the world in terms of our standard of healthcare, at least on some markers. So we have an excellent healthcare system, there's no doubt about that. But if we've ended up in that little loop there, we aren't as good as what we used to be. Now, there are some great techniques of being able to use different things and arteries now instead of veins, though veins sometimes have to be used even in the bypass and things like that. But you aren't necessarily as good as what you once were. And if you don't do anything about it, then unfortunately, sickness comes again. Let me just take you through this little scenario, and this was much better when it was staged. You can see that if you start off physically well and then come across to the right, you've got subclinical disease going on. So you're doing what you're normally doing, but particularly when you're young, you're not thinking about it, and it doesn't really hit you until generally a little bit later, though it is seeming to get earlier and earlier. So it might be, poor sleep, no activity, high calories, nutrient-poor diets, all that sort of stuff. That happens over a number of years, continues over years, and then you develop clinical symptoms. Now it might be metabolic syndrome, it could be diabetes, it might be cancer at some point, you might be developing some neurological issue. Seek medical assistance. Most of that, within the context of our current healthcare system, is going to be mostly pharmaceutical or surgical. There will be some talk of lifestyle intervention, but pretty much we don't have a very effective lifestyle intervention system, certainly not one that is paid for by Medicare. And so if you don't do anything effective about it, what do? Cycle back up. And you'll keep cycling through those. And it might be just gout and diabetes to start off with, but then it starts to be heart disease. And then you'll end up with having problems with some of the nerves, non-healing wounds, visual impairments, amputation, cancers, dementia. Any one of those is possible. And yet all of those are lifestyle linked. If we could do an effective intervention at a lifestyle level, we could probably prevent the vast majority, if not all of those, when done effectively. So modern healthcare, this is from RACGP, an estimated 140,000 cases of diagnostic error occur in Australia each year. 250,000 Australians are hospitalised each year because of medication error, misuse and misadventure. And another 400,000 presentations to emergency departments are likely due to medication-related problems. You know, hospitals are fantastic places most of the time. And I'll just give you a quick example of myself. About 10 years ago, I had a cycling accident. I was actually riding home from work, coming down quite a steep hill, beating my previous record. I was cycling very quickly. Somebody pulled out in front of me. I managed to miss them, but they spun some dirt up into my eyes, which I couldn't see. Being a typical male and not wanting to lose the pace that I had set for myself, decided I knew exactly where the bridge was, figured my eyes would clear before I actually got to the creek. Well, two things happened. One is my eyes didn't clear before I got to the creek, and the second thing was I was about 3 meters out. So I missed the bridge. Literally, my bike just dropped over. I have no premonition of this whatsoever, which is great because I have no PTSD. And, I literally just head first, rocket man into the opposite bank. Fortunately, missed the cement bit and hit the dirt bit. I could tell when I landed that there was a problem. My back didn't feel quite right. And as it turned out, I'd actually had a major crush injury to thoracic 4, 5, and 6. And at that stage, I could still feel my legs, though at that time it was June, and they started to go numb, but I wasn't sure whether that was because my feet were still in the cold water in the creek, or whether I was actually losing some neurological function. Fortunately, the ambulance finally found me, and then the mistakes started to happen. So we got onto the backboard okay, and neck brace and all that sort of stuff. But when I was put into the ambulance, they didn't actually strap me down. But they put the mask on, and he's making me feel better. But I could say, not strapped down. And I said, oh, I'm not strapped in. He pats me on the chest. He says, you're all right, mate. We've got you now. I'm thinking, you haven't got me. So I just grabbed hold of the straps, and I just hooked them in with my elbows. And you could feel yourself go over the gutter and, that sort of stuff. Anyway, got to the emergency department. That was all good. I was feeling better, and I guess my response to trauma is often make jokes. And my wife tends to think they may not always be appropriate. But, so when we got into the emergency and just getting wheeled through there, fairly lighthearted, and so they were tending to think, oh, look, this is probably not much. So when they were going to take me off the gurney, they weren't going to do a proper log roll. And I go, no. I can still feel my legs. I think we probably should do. Anyway, so finally they got the extra people and away we went. Got onto the gurney safely. Then it's off to X-ray. Now we got up to X-ray. I'm not sure what was actually written on the request form, but when we got up to X-ray, and they're putting the contrast plate behind me, they put the contrast plate right at the level of my brake, and I knew the brake was sitting in the middle there. And as I could feel, I'm thinking that's just going to act as a fulcrum as I go back. And so I said, oh, no, just shift that plate up a little bit so that it's actually sitting properly. And so they did, and sure enough, down we went. And then when they got the X-rays, everybody was, panicking, and, this guy's really about to lose his legs. But I guess the point of that is to say we have got excellent people, but mistakes get made, don't they? And it happens all of the time. So possibly don't be, and just one other quick story. We worked in Africa for 3 years, and let me just tell you, the people who come for holidays from places like Australia or the US or New Zealand, etc., will often go to Africa and just assume that the hospitals and everything function just the same. No, they don't. Be really, really careful when you're going internationally. We don't have the same healthcare system. And I like this one. Going into hospital far riskier than flying, says the WHO. If you were admitted to hospital tomorrow in any country, your chances of being subjected to an error in your care would be something like 1 in 10. Your chances of dying due to error in healthcare would be 1 in 300. This compared to a risk of dying in an air crash of 1 in 10 million for being a passenger. So we do have some, probably best if we can stay healthy. And I like this quote from Harvard, from the Harvard Medical School. This is Monique making a comment. What if I could prescribe a pill that could prevent or treat high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, even depression and dementia, which is very true. It certainly make a big contribution. And if researchers had extensively researched this pill and the result was ample proof that it's effective, on top of that, it's practically free and has no bad side effects. As a matter of fact, its only side effects are improved sleep, increased energy, and weight loss. I mean, I would love to have that pill. Actually, folks, she says, this powerful medicine exists. It's really and readily available for everyone. It's called Intensive Lifestyle Change. Its active ingredients are physical activity, drastic improvements in diet, and it works well, amazingly well. If it were an actual pill, no doubt millions of people would be clamoring for it and some pharmaceutical company would reap massive profits. But here's how you get it. Intensive Lifestyle Changes involves knowledge and action. And I believe most of us here, if not all of us, have the knowledge, which many doctors think is just too difficult to teach. Now, unfortunately, too difficult to teach, often because I don't believe our medical schools train hard enough in it. And many patients think is too difficult to do. And it's true. If you think it's too difficult, well, maybe it is. And it's okay, just recognize that, okay, the path you're on is a short one. And I won't even say a pleasant one, but at least it's that you've made the choice, you're doing it your way. So lifestyle medicine, or lifestyle modification, it really is your choice. So hopefully as we go through this week, we'll get a little bit more opportunity for exchange of ideas, some knowledge as we go through tomorrow, particularly with some of the nutrition and the next day physical activity, etc. But I hope that at the very foundation from today, you get a perspective that absolutely lifestyle medicine is one of the major solutions to the problem that we have in healthcare. Healthcare is doing the best it can using actually a model that doesn't really work very well. The disease management model is not great. Preventive health really does work. And look, as Adventists, for those of us that have been Adventists for a long time, you recognize that we have had a heads up on this many, many years ago. But certainly I recognize that my generation at least dropped the ball very badly. And so a lot of the generations coming through have no idea what that means. But there is a resurgence, and we are certainly not the head of anything when it comes to lifestyle medicine. We are way behind from many people. But we still have, I think, a perspective which is probably the most effective. Now, there is opportunity, I think, for questions. I'm not sure what the time is. Time is over, so it looks like we're going to have to finish it. But I'm happy to chat if people would like to discuss afterwards. But let's just bow our heads for prayer before we finish. Father in heaven, Lord, we just thank you for the blessing that you've given us of the health and of the knowledge that you've given us also, and also of the great opportunity, Lord, for being able to put these things in practice. We pray that you would inspire us, Lord, and we know that you love us, which is why you've given these things. Pray that you'll be with each one of us here, and that we might be examples to those around us. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you so much, Ross. Folk, this afternoon at 2:30 in the back of the dining hall, we'd like to invite all health leaders, pastors, health enthusiasts to come and meet together so that we can meet you, share what's happening on our calendar in the Health Ministries Department. There are a couple of copies at the back and also some copies as a free giveaway of A Taste of Food as Medicine for you to take as well. We would love to, network, support you in what you're doing at your local churches, share what's involved in the health programs and the training. So this afternoon at 2:30 in the back of the dining hall, you're all invited to be there. And thank you so much, Ross, for your presentation. We'll see you back here at 11 tomorrow. Have a great day.